I'm going to continue my series on Bobby Fischer's best sacrifices. In the last video, I covered the Letelier vs Fischer game, where Bobby stunned his opponent by sacrificing his queen in the middle of nowhere. But in this video, I'll be showing you a game which won him the Brilliancy prize. There is something very special about this game. You know, when Bobby's sacrifice and his calculations were of such a depth that even the Grandmasters that were commentating this game could not figure out what was Bobby up to. Well, more of that later. Let's dive into it. This game was played between Robert Byrne. Robert Byrne was the brother of Donald Byrne versus Bobby Fischer in the USA Championship 1963-64. Playing black was the greatest player of all times, Bobby Fischer, and it's black to play and win. So do pause the video and try to find the combination that Bobby played here. Okay, black in this position stunned his opponent by playing a knight sacrifice. Knight takes f2. So what's the point behind the sacrifice? Well, the idea is to drag the king out in the open and weaken his defense. So now we have knight to g4 check, and the king has to step back to g1. Well, if it goes to f1, black plays knight takes e3, and that forces the king and the queen. Well, so the king has to go back to g1. Now we have knight takes e3. This is a triple attack. The knight attacks the queen, the rook, and the bishop. And white simply plays queen to d2. And everyone was wondering, okay, what's wrong? I mean, black has sacrificed a knight and he's going to take the rook. But after knight takes d1, rook take d1, white's position is completely fine. In fact, it's even better. So everyone was wondering what's the point behind Bobby's sack. And Bobby, in this position, surprised everyone by not capturing the rook, but instead the bishop. And what's the idea of all of this? Well, the bishop defends the king. He defends the light squares around him, and without that bishop, the king's defenses will be compromised. And that's exactly what happened. White played king takes knight, and now you can see that all the squares around the king are weakening. In fact, the king himself is exposed. So all you have to do is open lines for the bishops, this deadly bishops, the bishop on g7 and this bishop on a6. So you do that by playing d4. That opens up the bishop's diagonal towards the king. Brilliant. So now this pawn cannot be tolerated. It has to be captured, and knight takes d4. Black now played bishop to b7 check. The king moves back to f1. Well, you might say, what's wrong with g1? G1 looks more safe, keeping the king in the corner. In fact, this loses very quickly to bishop d4. After queen d4, you have rook e1. So this is a simple deflection. If the rook takes, then we pick up the queen, that too with a check. So the king in this position went back to f1. And this is where you see the genius of Bobby Fischer. Here he plays queen to d7. I mean, he calculated all of this 10 moves before, and this is really wonderful when you have to calculate a silent move like this one. I mean, this is a silent killer. In the middle of all the battle is raging, and suddenly you play a silent move like this one, it just throws your opponent off. In fact, after this move, white is completely lost. The threat is to play queen to h3, and the white king has no shelter. So, for example, I can show you one variation. In the book, Bobby Fischer mentions this variation with queen to f2, and now we have queen h3 check. Well, the king cannot step out because of this rook on e8, so he has to step in. And you can see the king has only one defender, that is the queen. If the queen moves away, there will be checkmate on queen g2. So now we play rook e1. This is a deflection. It creates a discoordination between the pieces. So if queen captures, then we have queen to g2 checkmate. Okay, that's losing. What happens if rook takes? That loses in a few moves after bishop takes. So you just block it. That's taken. If takes, then queen g2 is checkmate. Well, that was quite a brilliant game, and especially this move, knight takes g2, completely surprised his opponent. So let me show you what Byrne wrote about this. And as I said, pondering why Fischer would choose a line because it was so obviously lost for black, there suddenly came knight takes g2. This dazzling move came as a shocker. The culminating combination is of such depth that even the very moment at which I resigned, both grandmasters who were commentating on the players for the spectators in a separate room believed that I had won game. So even the commentators and the spectators believed that white was winning. In fact, black was all the time in control. And this is what Kirby, the editor of the South African Chess Quarterly, wrote. The Byrne game was quite fabulous, and I cannot call to mind anything to parallel it. After White's 11th move, I should adjudicate his position is slightly superior, and it was completely safe. To turn this into a mating position in just 11 moves is more witchcraft than chess. Quite honestly, I do not see the man who can stop Bobby at this time. So this was written by the editor and Robert Byrne himself. And this game actually was awarded as the Brilliancy Prize with such a brilliant performance. This was the USA Championship 1963 to 64 where Bobby crushed everybody. So thank you for watching and more videos are on the way.